They say the past always finds a way to catch up with you, but I never thought it would come crashing into my life like this. It all started with a random email, an invitation to a high school reunion I didn't even plan to attend. But buried in the thread was a photo from 20 years ago. My wife, Claire, in the arms of someone I never expected to see again. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some cruel joke, until I noticed the timestamp. It wasn't from 20 years ago. It was from last month, taken in a city where she was supposed to be on a business trip. My perfect life began to splinter at the edges, and before I knew it, I was tumbling down a rabbit hole of secrets I never wanted to uncover. The day my life began to unravel wasn't marked by a catastrophic event or a dramatic confrontation. It started quietly with a single sentence from my 6-year-old son, Max. Why did Mom call Uncle Theo her escape plan? I froze mid-step, holding a plate of half-eaten waffles. The question hit like a sucker punch, so casual and innocent that Max clearly didn't understand its weight. "What did you say, buddy?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. Max swung his legs under the kitchen stool, oblivious to the storm brewing behind my eyes. "I heard her talking on the phone last night. She said, 'Theo, you're my escape plan.'" Theo wasn't a relative. He was Claire's oldest friend, a man I'd met once or twice at awkward gatherings and never thought twice about. My first instinct was denial. Claire had always been fiercely loyal to her friendships, but escape plan sounded too loaded to be harmless. Still, I smiled and ruffled Max's hair. "Mom must have been joking," I said. "You know how silly she can be." Max grinned, already distracted by his tablet. But my mind churned with possibilities I didn't want to consider. Claire and I had been married for 9 years. It wasn't perfect, what marriage is, but I thought we were happy. Sure, we argued over the usual things. Money, time, who was supposed to pick up Max or our daughter Lily from soccer practice. But deep down, I believed we had an unspoken understanding that we were in this together. That belief started to crack when I found the receipts. It happened a week later, when Claire was out of town for work. She was a regional sales manager for a health tech company, and her trips were frequent but predictable. I was cleaning out the car before picking the kids up from school when I found a crumpled receipt wedged under the passenger seat. It was from a boutique hotel 2 towns over. The date on the receipt didn't align with her work schedule, and the bill included 2 breakfast meals and a bottle of champagne. I stared at the receipt, feeling my stomach twist. I spent the next few days walking on a knife's edge, trying to act normal. I told myself it could be innocent. Maybe she had a meeting with clients, or maybe it was a work perk she hadn't mentioned. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. When Claire returned, I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I started paying closer attention. That's when I noticed the late-night phone calls. She was always careful, stepping out onto the porch or hiding in the bathroom. But once or twice, I caught her whispering into her phone, her voice hushed and full of something I couldn't quite identify. Excitement? Guilt? One night, I couldn't take it anymore. After she fell asleep, I took her phone from the nightstand. The first thing I noticed was that her call log had been wiped clean. That was the moment everything shifted. Up until then, I'd been clinging to the idea that this was all a misunderstanding. But deleting her call log was deliberate. It was a choice. I checked her messages next, but they, too, were suspiciously empty. Whoever she was talking to, she was going to great lengths to hide it. A wave of anger and despair washed over me. My Claire, my wife, the mother of my children, was lying to me. The woman I'd shared my life with for almost a decade was keeping secrets. The next morning, I decided to follow her. It was a Tuesday, one of her work-from-home days. She told me she had a meeting at a nearby cafe with a colleague. I kissed her goodbye like always, but as soon as she drove off, I got into my car and followed at a safe distance. She didn't go to the cafe. Instead, she drove to a park on the outskirts of town, where Theo was waiting by a bench. I recognized him immediately, his tall frame, the way he leaned casually against the bench like he had all the time in the world. Claire parked, got out of the car, and walked straight into his arms. I watched as they talked, their heads close together, her hand lingering on his arm. There was no dramatic kiss, No obvious sign of betrayal, but the intimacy between them was undeniable. That night, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Did you see Theo today?" I asked casually over dinner. Claire froze, her fork hovering over her plate. "What?" I said. "Did you see Theo today?" I repeated, my voice steady but sharp. She set her fork down and forced a laugh. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I saw you." Her face drained of color. "Tom, it's not what you think." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't insult me by pretending I didn't see what I saw. Just tell me the truth, Claire. What's going on?" For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide and filled with something that looked like fear. Then she sighed and looked away. "It's complicated," she said finally. "No," I said, slamming my hand on the table. "It's not complicated. You're either faithful to me or you're not. So which is it?" Her silence was answer enough. Over the next few days, the truth came out in pieces. She admitted that she and Theo had reconnected months ago and that their relationship had crossed boundaries. "It wasn't physical," she insisted. "But I needed someone to talk to." I wanted to believe her, but the receipt from the hotel, the deleted calls, the look in her eyes when she thought I wasn't watching, they all told a different story. I told her I needed space. She moved into the guest room, and I threw myself into caring for the kids, trying to shield them from the growing tension between us. Then, one evening, Claire came to me with a proposition. "Let's go to therapy," she said, her voice trembling. "For the kids, if nothing else. We owe them that much." I wanted to laugh. Therapy? After everything she'd done? But then I thought of Max and Lily, of how much they loved their mother, and how much I still wanted to believe that we could fix this. "Fine," I said. "But if I find out there's more to this story than you're telling me, I'm done. No second chances." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Tom. I'll do whatever it takes." What I didn't tell her was that I wasn't going to therapy to save our marriage. I was going to uncover the truth. Because deep down, I knew she was still lying to me. Claire was quiet as we drove to the therapist's office for our first session. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, twisting her wedding ring around and around. I glanced at her briefly, trying to read her face, but she avoided my gaze. The silence between us felt heavier than ever. Dr. Eliza Hart, the therapist, was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a calm, steady presence. She welcomed us into her cozy office, the walls lined with shelves of books and framed motivational quotes. "Tell me what brings you here," she said, folding her hands on her lap. Claire and I exchanged a glance. She hesitated, then spoke first. "We've been having communication issues," Claire said carefully. I almost laughed out loud. Communication issues? That was how she wanted to frame this? But I bit my tongue and waited for my turn. "And trust issues," I added, my voice sharper than I intended. "Claire has been hiding things from me." Dr. Hart nodded, her expression neutral. "Hiding things, Claire? Can you tell me more about that?" Claire shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I've been struggling, feeling disconnected, and I confided in someone outside our marriage. It was wrong, and I know that. But I didn't mean to hurt Tom." "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I snapped, unable to hold back. "You lied to me. You deleted your call logs, met him behind my back, and God knows what else. How am I supposed to trust you again?" Dr. Hart raised a hand, her tone soothing. "Let's take a step back. Tom, it sounds like you're carrying a lot of pain and anger right now." "Claire, would you say that's accurate?" Claire nodded silently, tears pooling in her eyes. But I wasn't here to let her play the victim. Over the next few sessions, we began to unpack the layers of our crumbling marriage. Claire admitted that she had felt neglected for years, overwhelmed by the demands of her job and parenting while I focused on providing for the family. She claimed that Theo had been a safe space, someone who listened without judgment. "But why him?" I asked during one particularly heated session. "Why not me?" Her answer gutted me. "Because you never really listened, Tom. You were always so busy being the provider. But I needed a partner, not just a paycheck." Her words hit harder than I expected. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had taken her for granted. But that still didn't excuse her betrayal. Things took a darker turn when I began digging deeper into Theo's role in all this. I hadn't forgotten the hotel receipt or the champagne breakfast for two. Claire insisted it was all innocent, a one-time lapse in judgment. But something didn't sit right with me. One evening, after putting Max and Lily to bed, I pulled up Theo's social media. His accounts were mostly private, but his profile pictures told a story. In one, he stood in front of a boutique winery I recognized. It was the same one Claire had mentioned visiting during one of her girls' trips last year. My stomach tightened. The dates matched up. She hadn't been with her friends. She'd been with him. At our next therapy session, I couldn't hold back anymore. "You lied again," I said, tossing the printed photo of Theo at the winery onto the coffee table. "Were you with him there, too?" Claire's face turned pale. "Tom, Stop lying," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Just tell me the truth, for once." Dr. Hart intervened, her voice calm but firm. "Let's all take a breath. Claire, this is your chance to be honest. Holding back will only make things worse." Claire's lip trembled. "Yes," she admitted finally. "I was with him, but it was just that one time." I laughed bitterly. "Just that one time? That's what you said about the hotel. How am I supposed to believe anything you say anymore?" After the session, Claire and I sat in the car in tense silence. I gripped the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, while she stared out the window. "Do you even love me anymore?" I asked quietly. Her silence was deafening. That night, while Claire slept in the guest room, I decided to dig deeper. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she was letting on. I found Theo's phone number in an old group text thread from years ago. My hands trembled as I dialed it. He answered on the second ring. "Hello, it's Tom," I said, my voice cold. There was a long pause. "Tom, this is unexpected." "Cut the crap, Theo," I snapped. "I know you've been seeing Claire. I just want to know the truth. All of it." He sighed heavily. "Look, man, I don't want to make this worse than it already is. But if you're asking if something happened between us, yes, it did. A few times." My grip on the phone tightened. "When?" "Last year. And a few weeks ago." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. When I confronted Claire the next morning, she broke down completely. "Yes, I slept with him," she admitted, sobbing. "I didn't want to, but I was weak. I was so angry at you, and he made me feel seen." Her words didn't bring the clarity I thought they would. Instead, they plunged me deeper into confusion. "You didn't want to?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What does that even mean? Was he pressuring you?" She shook her head. "No, it's not like that. But it felt wrong. I knew it was wrong, even as it was happening." For the next few days, I barely spoke to Claire. I couldn't even look at her. But something Theo had said on the phone kept nagging at me. "She told me she was scared of you." Was it possible I'd been blind to my own faults? Had I created an environment where she felt so trapped, so unseen, that she turned to someone else for comfort? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for certain: our marriage was hanging by a thread. At the next therapy session, I surprised both Claire and Dr. Hart by saying something I hadn't planned. "I'm willing to try," I said quietly, "for the kids, but only if she tells me everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. I need the whole story." Claire looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "I'll tell you everything," she promised. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be ready to hear it. Claire's promise to tell me everything wasn't immediate. For days after our last therapy session, she seemed hesitant, almost scared to start. I didn't press her. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear the whole truth. But the silence between us became unbearable. So one night, as the kids slept and the house was wrapped in stillness, I sat across from her at the kitchen table. "Tell me," I said simply. She didn't look up at first, just stared at her hands. Then, slowly, she began to speak. It started a year ago, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. After Lily's birthday party. Do you remember how stressed I was? I nodded, though I didn't understand the relevance. That party had been chaos, with screaming kids and a cake disaster. But I'd thought we'd handled it well together. You were so focused on making everything perfect, she continued. And I felt invisible, like I wasn't part of the team, just the one cleaning up after everything. Claire, I interrupted. We were both exhausted. That's not an excuse to. I know it's not an excuse, she snapped, her eyes flashing. But that's how it felt. And then Theo texted me, asking how the party went. I vented to him and he listened. For the first time in months, I felt like someone saw me. Her words stung, but I stayed quiet. It didn't become physical until months later, she admitted. I didn't plan for it to happen. But we met for lunch one day and it just spiraled. After the first time, I hated myself. I told him it was over, but he kept reaching out. And every time I was angry at you, or felt ignored, I gave in. I clenched my fists under the table. Why didn't you just talk to me? I tried, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. But every time I brought up how I felt, you brushed it off or changed the subject. You were so focused on work, on being the perfect provider, that you didn't notice how far apart we'd grown. Her words hit me like a hammer. As much as I wanted to blame her for everything, I couldn't ignore the truth in what she was saying. For the next few days, her confession weighed heavily on me. The knowledge that she had chosen someone else, repeatedly, felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. But mixed in with the anger and betrayal was a creeping sense of guilt. Had I been so focused on what I thought a good husband should be that I'd failed to be the partner she needed? One evening, I called Theo. You've done enough damage, I said as soon as he answered. Stay out of our lives. He sighed on the other end of the line. I never meant for things to go this far, Tom. I'm sorry. You're not sorry, I snapped. You're sorry you got caught. But if you care about her at all, you'll leave her alone. He didn't argue. All right, you won't hear from me again. Therapy sessions became more intense after that. Dr. Hart pushed us to confront not just the affair, but the deeper issues that had festered for years. Claire admitted she had always felt overshadowed by my drive to succeed, while I confessed that I'd used work as a way to avoid dealing with our problems. I thought I was doing the right thing, I said during one session. I thought providing for the family was enough. But I see now that I wasn't really present. It's not just on you, Tom, Claire said. I should have fought harder for us instead of looking for an escape. I should have been braver. The breakthrough came during a quiet Saturday afternoon. We were in the backyard, watching Lily and Max play tag, when Claire turned to me and said, I'm willing to let you go. Her voice was calm, almost resigned. If you can't forgive me, I'll understand, she said. I'll move out. We can share custody of the kids. I don't want to make this harder for you than it already is. Her words caught me off guard. For the first time, she wasn't begging for another chance or making excuses. She was letting me decide, completely and without pressure. And that's when I realized something. I still loved her. Forgiving her wasn't easy. In fact, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But I made the choice to try. Not for the kids, not for appearances, but because I wanted to believe we could rebuild something stronger. We set boundaries. Claire blocked Theo on every platform and agreed to full transparency with her phone and emails. I committed to spending more time at home and listening, really listening, when she shared her thoughts and feelings. It wasn't perfect. There were days when the anger flared up again, and I'd catch myself replaying the betrayal in my mind. But every time I looked at Lily and Max, I reminded myself why I was fighting for this. 6 months later, we stood together at Lily's school play, watching her beam as she took a bow. Claire reached for my hand, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't pull away. As we drove home that night, Max dozed off in the back seat, and Claire turned to me. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For giving me another chance. For fighting for us. I didn't respond right away. The road stretched ahead of us, dark and uncertain. but for the first time, I felt like we were moving forward together. "Don't thank me yet," I said finally. "We're still figuring this out, but I'm glad we're trying." She smiled, and for the first time in a long time it felt real. Not all stories end with a clean resolution. Some, like ours, are messy and full of scars, but they're worth fighting for. And as I looked at my family that night, I realized I wasn't ready to let go of what we'd built. Not yet. We were far from perfect, but we were trying. And for now, that was enough.